Welcome back to the Red Dice Diaries. I'm your host, John, and this episode is the first in a series of conversations that myself and Johannes had about our long-running campaigns, the Chronicle of the Crowns and Smoke and Snow for Burning Wheel and Old School Essentials, respectively, and just a general chit-chat about how we think the campaigns are going and our opinions on long-running campaigns and stuff like that. So after the music, we'll be getting straight into that. Yeah, so what I was hoping to do is start off by maybe both of us give a bit of a, I suppose, capsule description of the two campaigns we're running. Obviously, you're running Burning Wheel, I'm running Old School Essentials at the moment, and then we've both been running them for a fair old while now. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, mine's bi-weekly, and I've got a ridiculous amount of hours in it, and yours is weekly. So you've chonked up a fair amount of hours in that campaign. So if you were going to give a capsule description of your Burning Wheel Chronicle of the Crowns campaign, what would it be?
A world, a sort of fantastical world in the twilight years of its existence. It has already endured several sort of end of the ages type scenarios where things are just being whittled down on every axis, really. And in these last years, the waning years of this world, there's a sort of spark of resurgent hope in the form of a person who could do great things if they but found the tools and the will to do it. And I suppose that's the very, very short form of it.
Yeah, and I mean, if I was going to do likewise for my Smoke and Snow campaign, I would say it's about the original homeland of humanity, once lost to a great ice age, is now revealed as the ice sheets are retreating, and the heroes are part of the first wave of the ancestors of the people who fled the advancing ice sheets, now returning to reclaim their ancient homeland. But it's a place they've heard of in legends, but they've never actually been. So although their forebears came from there, it's effectively a new land for them that they're now trying to reclaim and sort of discover what happened in the old history and stuff like that. And I've often seen online, particularly recently, a lot of people talking about high-level games in inverted commas and long-running campaigns. And I thought, to be honest, I know we've done a couple of seasons of Smoke and Snow, but this is probably one of the longer campaigns I've run. I don't know how your Burning Wheel game stacks up in terms of campaigns you've run.
Yeah, it's getting up there. Previously in our sort of sphere of what we've been doing the past several years now, I think this is now, at least by number of times we played, it's now the number one longest. Previously, that was started with a number game at 29 sessions. So yeah, it's pretty much the longest.
So looking at Chronicle of the Crowns, your Burning Wheel campaign, we've logged nearly 71 hours total play on that, and that's just the recorded actual sessions, not all of the sort of talking and discussion we've done.
Yep.
And for Smoke and Snow, which is obviously running before Chronicle of the Crowns, we've logged 130 hours of that. So they're both a pretty respectable chunk of our lives, running these campaigns.
Yeah, that's a lot of movies.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and like I say, so I thought it'd be interesting for us just to have a chat about how we think these campaigns have been going on. Anything we've sort of noticed about them as particularly long-running campaigns, because you tend to find people sort of, it's either people I've been running the same game since 1983 and been running for the same group since I was a 5-year-old lad, and now I'm 60 years old or whatever. Or it's people who are all my campaigns tend to fizzle out after a handful of sessions. And there seems to be a lot more of the shorter run campaigns and there are the long run campaigns.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's the very rare campaign that goes on. What would I completely pull out of thin air here? Let's call it like half a year. I
Yeah.
think a lot of campaigns, probably like the majority, probably have to be like sub 6 months. As far as like I've just speaking from my experience, of course, and what I've sort of come across the hobby. I think the sort of shorter form campaign. Actually, let's not even talk in months, but sort of comparative like session, like how many sessions.
Yes.
I think if you're doing like bi-weekly 6 months, I guess that might be a sort of like good measuring average for just again pulling out of thin air these numbers, but the years long, especially, I think that's the rare one. That's the unicorn of the hobby.
Yeah, that's it. And I've been thinking a little bit about why that might be, and I think probably one of the most obvious answers is, let's face it, it's far easier to get people to sign on for a sort of shorter run campaign, or like for instance, if you say to someone like, oh, we're going to do, well, we've talked about how difficult it is to get people to sign on for a weekly game regardless of how long it's going to run. And that's not to like throw shade at anyone, because obviously everyone's got other shiz going on, but trying to get people to sign on for like a weekly game when you're like, oh, it's going to be like an open-ended campaign, we're not going to be sure how it's going to run, is a hell of a different sort of thing, and it's a lot more commitment than saying like, oh, we're going to run a game like on a weekend, or we're going to run like a couple of sessions of this game. Are you okay for it? So it's the commitment of like, oh, can I commit like 8 hours over the course of a few days? And most people are like, well, yeah, I probably can. Whereas if you're like, oh, potentially I'm going to be committing like 4 to 5 hours on this day at this time every week for an indeterminate amount of time in the future.
Signing like an indefinite contract basically for an activity at some point in your week. It's infinitely easier, I think, to book off a weekend. Rather than say like, oh yeah, one of my 7 days a week I'm going to dedicate to this. I say dedicate to this because you're probably going to be looking at like, I don't know, average length, maybe 3 hours a session, depending on various factors. And if you're booking off 3 hours, you've got a full-time job, maybe you got family stuff to tend to. That's your day. That's one day just fully booked already. So I think it's definitely more of a commitment that way. And it also why I've been so keen on hanging on to the Thursday arrangement here, because
definitely. I can understand
because we made it work. We actually have a weekly game, which is something that we haven't really had before. We found out the Thursday slot. Haven't really had that. We've been running on bi-weekly for years before that.
Yeah, I mean, as we've said, we've talked about it before, and obviously, as you know, I sort of tried to sort of get the Smoke and Snow to like a weekly game, but due to various things, like bi-weekly was like the most we could manage. And don't get me wrong, I'm still very much a fan of like the weekly slot for a number of different reasons, but one I'll just float out there, which just sort of bubbled to the surface recently. Obviously, as you know, because I'm doing like some LARPing next week, I've had to like push my game back. And if you're running bi-weekly, that means you've got 2 sessions a month. If you then have to cancel or miss out one of those sessions for any reason, it can be 3-4 weeks between sessions. And that's enough time for people to start forgetting stuff, and it's sort of like fading to the background of your memory. Whereas if you're running 4 sessions a month, you're doing it weekly, then if, like, say the worst happened and you had to cancel a session for whatever reason, there's still 3 sessions in that month, and it's only a week between sessions. So, it still sort of stays quite immediate and sort of stays in your mind. Whereas, like I said, we've all got stuff going on in our lives that like distracts us with like other things. Some obviously like actually more important. So it's very easy to be like, oh yeah, I'll worry about the game a bit later, and just things to like fall through the cracks. I mean, I know that's one of the reasons I tend to like make fairly extensive notes in games, to the point where like it annoys my wife when we've played games in person, because I'll have a notepad there and I'll almost be continually writing on it, just because I'm like, oh, my memory's so poor that like between sessions I'll probably forget some of this stuff. Whereas like for your game, I've got a little notepad window I have open, and I just mute myself and like type away while stuff's going on, and then before the session, I mean, I don't get time every time, but before the session, I can just go, right, let's have a look over the last couple of sessions. Obviously, my notes aren't 100%. You always miss some stuff, but it's enough for me to be like, oh yeah, we're in the Great Swamp. We're gonna like fight the Pale Ones, and then we're gonna come back. We're gonna get some training from the poet, and like I can refresh myself on a few names and stuff like that. So that for my own peace of mind, when I come to the session, I'm not turning up to the session and being like, oh, Johannes, what are we doing in the session?
Where are we?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and obviously, I don't rock up being like, I've got an encyclopedic memory of everything that's happened in a previous session. But I like for myself just to have, because obviously, like being a GM myself, I know the GM's got like enough on their plate when it comes to actually running the session. I personally don't want them then to have to also explain previous sessions to me, because I forgot them when I was actually there, so I should have like remembered it or made some notes or whatever. And I'm sure people with like better memories don't have to make as many notes as me, but whatever works for you and like, helps you sort of like get yourself back into that headspace.
Absolutely. Any way that you can increase your own, enjoyment and engagement with the game. Yeah, all good. And it is. There's that weird like almost like teacher moment when you start talking about something that people figure is important, and everyone's notepads come out. They start scribbling, and you're like, yes, they're picking up on the things that I'm putting down.
I've got to admit, for me, in terms of like my note taking, I'm a bit of a sucker for when like a bad guy gives like the bad guy speech. And I like there's a few of like the speeches from your NPC guys where I've pretty much got them written down word for word, like especially if it's one where I've not actively been involved, because I don't like to be like typing and then suddenly be like, oh sorry, did you want me to like
reply?
So like if I'm directly involved, like the notes are a bit more sort of like scattershot, whereas if I'm not, I can like write it down like word for word, 'cause I'm pretty quick at typing.
Stenographer.
Well, that's it. It's also handy as well, because like every now and again I'll just sort of like randomly like read through the notes or go back a couple of sessions, and there's always that bit when you get to the villain like, oh yeah, I remember that. I stole that gold off us back 3 sessions ago. And I'll often find things where like I'll be like, oh yeah, I forgot about that bit that happened in the past, because obviously we're involved in like the current story and what's going on, and then you sort of like look back at it and you're like, oh yeah, I forgot that was that guy that we met, and we talked about these plans we were going to do, and then we got distracted by like this, and we never really got back to it. So I always find it really useful for me, because it reminds me of like stuff that I might have forgotten, not because I'm like not paying attention to the game, but because I'm paying attention to like the current focus of the game, and not like the dung farmer we met like 6 sessions ago, who said like his geese were being bothered by like pale ones or whatever.
And that also, like, depending on the game, of course, but that does allow you to then start picking at the sort of unresolved threads at your leisure. Because if you noted them down, you can, if you want to, then be like, wait, we're back in the village of like Blackwater. Wasn't there like, this weird, we think maybe sorcerer living out, at the edges of the village, and we had some stuff going on with him, but then we had to leave, so we never resolved that. We want to go back to this potentially evil wizard and buy something off of whatever it is, but you're sort of you can direct things a little bit better if you've got that sort of, I don't know what to call it, like I guess unresolved threads, side quests, whatever you want to call it. That's good. It gives you also a little bit of that treasured why am I blanking on this now? Player agency. That's the thing.
Which as well, it's handy, because I give an example of like the last session we played of Chronicle of Crown, your game, when we got to the bit where Adelstan, like John's previous character's like brother, who was an inquisitor, turned up. And he was like, and Matthew was like, "Oh yeah, Athelstan." He was asking some questions, and I was like, "Dude, I know like everything about Athelstan, like since he's turned up."
Here's his file money.
Yeah, pretty much. and obviously, it's not always something I sort of rely on, because quite often I make notes and like I sort of like put a little symbol by it. But I wasn't there as my character, so I can't use it in character. But it's still nice to have, because, you know, even if I'm not there in character, you can still sort of gain an appreciation for like the other stuff that's going on in the game.
Mm-hmm.
And again, like I say, as someone who GMs myself, I like to think that, you know, I know how much effort GMs put into like making their games, so I'm like, oh, the least I can do is like actually appreciate the fact like other stuff's going on, even if like I'm not directly involved in it.
Yeah, no, and that's a cool part of the hobby as well, like being the spectator. If you're not on the spotlight, yeah, it's a free show basically to appreciate, and also act as a sort of, I don't know, angel choir. You know, you can like do stuff off the side, as we have done a lot in the Burning Wheel stuff, in sort of a little bit of a different form, because we have like one character who is sort of very central to this thing that we're sort of pursuing, what the story is about, more or less, in the game. And we've got, well, the advisors and all the people, the supporting cast to this very reluctant main character in the story.
Yeah, I was going to actually bring that up, because obviously we often sort of like hear, you know, social media and whatever, and people posting about RPGs, when you hear about people who want their characters to be like the spotlight character. They want to be in the spotlight all the time. And obviously we've sort of potentially end up with the reverse of that, where we've got like a spotlight character, but it's not necessarily, I don't mean anything bad by this, but it's not necessarily the player you would expect to like step into that role. And I mean, I think it's good to sort of like step a little bit outside your comfort zone every now and again, because otherwise, how do you like expand your sort of knowledge base and your sort of experience base? But I've also found sort of like being like one of the supporting characters. Obviously, when myself and John like created these characters after our first, it was very much understood like, right, the main character is like King Cameron, and we're the sort of supporting players. And I actually found that sort of quite freeing, really, in a sort of weird sense, because I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm not the spotlight character, so I know I'm here to like provide support to this main character who I already know, because I've already gained in sessions for that character, and that could then inform the PC that I was creating, rather than me sort of going like, oh, right, okay, so we've got this story with the crowns, how can I be a character of like equal importance in this sort of like massive mythic story? Whereas I was just like, oh, I don't really have to even bother thinking about that. I'm just like, right, I just have to be on like the King Cameron like crown train, and like provide support for that. And once I sort of stopped thinking about, oh, how do I make a character that's going to be parachuted in from nowhere, but is like somehow also vitally important. So as I put that out of my mind, I was like, oh, that's okay. I don't know. I've got nothing to worry about. I just make a character I want, and as long as he's like on board the King's train, it's all good.
Yep, and I think a part of that, at least for me, would be if I was making a character into this game, the thing that would very much inspire me, I think, and help me in making that character would be the very defined situation that the characters are in. You know, the fact that there's this reluctant sort of prophesied royal, I suppose, and the other characters are there for reasons of their own, in an effort to help this central character to achieve their fate, or whatever it is that we end up doing, but to support and help this one specific mythically burdened individual. And that gives, as is often the case, I find, when you put down limits, you can get some really good creative work done. And it's also a joy, personally, for me to do that in a specific environment. Like if I get specs for a character, I think I always have an easier time making a character then.
Yes.
So to compare, like a very easy comparison. So if we're starting let's call it like a West Marches game, Edges of the Civilization, there's the one point of light, and then our mission is to range into the Terra Incognita and do stuff, adventuring stuff. And that's it. I can make an infinity of characters for that, but I will have a lot more sort of fully fleshed out ideas if that's a little bit more defined. Maybe it's okay, this is the same setup, borderline, wilderness area. There's the one speck of light, but the one speck of light is like, this is the Wizards Guild that is trying to map out this area over here. Immediately, I have more like fully realized people coming into my mind.
Well, I mean, it's often pointed, one of the things that's quoted when people are talking about RPGs is that idea of people being almost sort of paralyzed by like limitless choice, effectively. And I know sort of like in like artist circles, it's often said that like when you're doing a painting or whatever, the hardest point is when you're just looking at that blank piece of paper and you can do anything with it to like make that first choice, like start narrowing down your choices. And I certainly know when I was studying art, one of the first things they advised, they would just pick like a neutral color, like grey, brown, or anything like that, and then just paint the whole of the page in that. Because once you've done that, you've already made the first step, and then making the second step's even easier.
Yeah, something to get you started. I guess is the thing. The there's that thing for like writing as well as an art form. The fear of the empty page is very, very real. I'm sure you can relate to this, being a published writer yourself. That's one that I also experience. I'm not much of a painter, but
to be honest, neither am I now. I'm far too out of practice.
Yeah, I suppose I was halfway, decent with miniatures at one point, but that's years ago. I must have lost the touch. But writing is the thing that I hit that difficulty of like how to make the first little movement.
Yeah, I mean it's one of the reasons when it comes to like planning out sessions, I've basically got like a bit of a sort of template I use where I sort of like paste the blank template in and then I make my notes on that. And again, that's just about, I'm not sat there looking at a blank screen. I've got the template where it's like, think about what sort of locations you're going to have. Think about what sort of monsters you might face. And once I start thinking about that, and like I say, those first few choices have sort of been made for me and it's pointing the way, it's a lot easier. Whereas in games in the past where I'm just like, I've got a blank notepad window, right, session for a game, let's go. I'll easily spend the first 10-15 minutes just staring at that blank page until I get an idea, and then I'm like, all right, okay, here we go, and you start writing up.
Yep. Yeah, I find myself putting on, like, looking up music. I'll spend like 10-15 minutes on that, like go on YouTube, find music to put on, and then I'll have some idea of like, okay, maybe I could start with this. Then I'll spend easily half an hour on Wikipedia researching some random stuff that came to mind, and I'm still at a blank page in my notes. Yeah.
I was going to say as well, it's an interesting thing I wanted to bring up because both of our sort of campaigns sort of loosely sort of revolve around, let's call them items of power, for want of a better term. Obviously, we've got the crowns in your game, and we've got like the god blades, the like magic swords in my game. And I thought it'd be interesting to chat about that because obviously your Burning Wheel game, I mean, it's called Chronicle of the Crown, so I'm guessing from the start, obviously knowing the background, you were like, right, yeah, this is the story. Because we, when we sort of first talked about it, we're like, oh yeah, we want like a sort of Tolkien-esque, like Lord of the Rings sort of dealio. And we talked about it, and it's like, oh yeah, instead of like a ring, what sort of magic item could there be? And went for the crowns, and then, oh yeah, there's like 3 crowns for the different species, and there's this ancient enemy returning, and we need to like unite the forces of light and whatever. And whereas with Smoke and Snow, I didn't really start off with the idea that, oh yeah, this is going to be you guys trying to like recover these like 3 magical like god blades.
No,
it was just a case of like, oh yeah, okay, the ice sheets have retreated. Yeah, you're traveling back to the land of your ancestors. You're all like settling there. Here's a little village that you've settled. Go and explore the hex map.
Yeah, what are you interested in?
Yeah, and then obviously because your character Weimar found like the sun sword, and then it was revealed there were like 2 other swords that were like linked to it, the green blade and the night blade, and all the players like really leapt on board with that, and we're like, oh right, yeah, okay, we think the green blade's in like Dolmenwood, it's part of this magical working, like, oh we've grabbed that, but it's like messed a few things up and it's like reshuffled things. Oh, and now we've heard like the night blade's fallen into this chasm, right, we've got to go and try and retrieve that. And that was never the sort of original intent of the game, but obviously as a games master, like if the players are like, yes, we're all in for the quest for like the 3 magic swords, like I'm just gonna be like, yeah, fine, 3 magic swords, great, let's go for it. But obviously as the GM of one of the campaigns and a player in the other campaigns, I was going to ask whether you thought there was any sort of difference between your campaign where this is not predetermined. I'm not saying it's like a railroad because I've had loads of freedom in the game, but like a very sort of set goal from the start and like a goal that sort of just developed as the game went on, whether you thought there was any sort of difference between the 2 campaigns because of that. I mean, I know they're not directly transferable because they're very different games, but
I do feel like there's a lot of similarities, especially at this point now in where we are in both of these games.
Yeah.
I feel like it's an entirely, like Smoke and Snow has an entirely organic history to what the game is about. We started with the very sort of basic concept of you're people here, you're trying to make it here, basically looking for resources, something to help us exist here. And then it developed on from that. And players being players, we develop interest in things that we find along the way and latch onto them, some of them with more intensity than others. And Burning Wheel, by comparison, needs to have a very strong, defined starting situation, which we ended up picking the idea because it's collaborative. Like this wasn't something I laid out.
Yes,
we made this. The players, all of us, made the starting situation of okay, so the game was going to revolve, at least like involve these items of power, of immense power, and more to the point, it's kind of going to involve the people using them eventually, and in that way, like Burning Wheel needs this like bespoke thing crafted to kick it off, but Burning Wheel also is about, as it says in the back of the book, it's about the these like highly dynamic characters and them pursuing the things that they believe in. And also,
I was actually sorry for interrupting. I was going to actually say, obviously we're not going to go like fully into the mechanics of like Burning Wheel because like there's 2 ginormous books if you're interested in that, and we've talked about it ourselves. But
1,400 pages,
indeed. But like very briefly, one of the you mentioned beliefs there. You create beliefs which are like sort of goals in Burning Wheel, and you get what are called author points, which are like your sort of fate points and stuff like that you can spend. But you're encouraged to create sort of like achievable goals related to your current circumstances. So I think, as you were saying, Burning Wheel, you need to have a goal you're going towards, whereas in sort of something like D&D with like Smoke and Snow, we can just plop you on a hex map and go do what you do, players, and you can crack on with that. Whereas in a Burning Wheel game, if you're just like, oh, do what you want, guys, how would you make your beliefs to like work with that and sort of get those fate points?
And it would be very like, I was thinking about this as you were starting to head towards this point. I was thinking about this. How would you make it work if you didn't have a strong starting situation? And it just feels like you would be putting in a lot more energy for a lot less output at that point. Like you could do that, but you would have to then sort of organically, the players would then have to have the idea in their sort of gamesmanship, I suppose, that you would start from these entirely disparate, sorry, not desperate, maybe desperate as well, but these entirely disparate situations. Maybe one of you is a baker, the other one, I don't know, traveling trader. There's that point when you're both in the same town, but other than that, we need to work to put these guys in the same picture. So everyone would need to be committed to the fact then of the story kind of then being about, if you want to have a good time with the game, then you're kind of signing up for the game to be about bringing these people together, like as a sort of like weird like starting goal without the starting goal, because you probably want to play with your friends. And now you could do entirely separate stories in Burningville as well. That is something you could do, but I think that does not it doesn't give you anywhere near the same kind of experience if you're playing with, you know, a party, let's say like a party of explorers, adventurers, as is the standard. It's not the same thing if you're all 3 different magnates in different cities. Like you're you're doing a lot of different stuff at that point.
And that's it for this episode. We had a lot more of a longer chat about this subject, and I'll be releasing some of that in future episodes. We hope you've enjoyed it. If you've got anything you'd like to say about long form campaigns, or maybe talk about a particularly memorable long campaign that you run yourself, you can get in touch with us a number of ways. You can leave a voicemail message on SpeakPipe or Anchor. There'll be links in the description of this episode, or you can send us an email to rddrpgpodcast@gmail.com. So until we see you again, take care, stay safe, and whatever you're playing, have fun.
But I think, did we entirely skip giving the intros to the campaigns that we're running?
Yeah.
We kind of jumped in.
Yeah, well, we sort of did. I'll tell you what, let's go back now. I'm at the power of editing. I'll put these at the beginning.